Hello everyone, my name is John McCann and I guess I'm probably best known for being the author of the book Passing Through the 82nd Airborne Division in Northern Ireland 1943 to 1944, which was published in 2006 and went on to later become the BBC documentary called Over Here. I've also worked on several documentaries, most notably the BBC three-part series Ships That Changed the World. Today, on the 75th anniversary of VE Day, I would like to present to you GI-NI Combat Chronicles 1942 to 1945. Part 1. 5 Corps at War in the Mediterranean Theatre of Operations. Operation Magnet was the build-up of American ground forces in Northern Ireland during 1942. In Operation Magnet, the first phase, which ran from January to November that year, consisted of 5 corps, which was approximately 30,000 men. The 34th Infantry Division arrived in January, followed in May by the 1st Armoured Division. And by October that year, both divisions had spent almost 10 months training in Northern Ireland. 5 corps were assigned to Northern Ireland in a defensive role and for large-scale training exercises. The 34th Infantry Division was to man the Irish border and guard against any threat of German invasion, either across the border or directly into Northern Ireland by sea or air. The 1st Armoured Division was there to provide armoured counter-attack support with 200 tanks. That same month, British Commonwealth forces under the command of Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery inflicted a decisive defeat on Rommel's Africa Corps at El Alamein. This, alongside Operation Torch, the Anglo-American invasion of North Africa in early November, brought the American forces into the North African campaign and the Mediterranean theatre of operations. Part of this force was the 1st Armoured and 34th Infantry Divisions, whose training in Northern Ireland made them a natural choice for this theatre. In late October 1942, the 1st Armoured Division was moved to England for final preparations. And in November, they joined forces with the 34th Infantry Division off the coast of northwest Africa for the pending invasion. On the 8th of November, the 1st Armoured Division, as part of the Central Task Force, had the job of assaulting the beaches and taking the nearby Algerian city of Oran. The success of this mission was greatly helped by the United States 1st Rangers Battalion, who spearheaded the invasion, executing a surprise night landing to silence gun batteries and open the way for the city's capture. Six months earlier, in June 1942, this elite American commando battalion of over 500 volunteers had been recruited and activated in Carrickfergus. Named after their commander, William Orlando Darby, Darby's Rangers was made up of almost 300 men from the 34th Infantry Division and over 100 from the 1st Armoured Division, the remainder coming from anti-aircraft and special troops units. On the same day as the 1st Armoured Division took the city of Oran, the 34th Infantry Division, as part of the Eastern Task Force, landed at Algiers, seizing its port and outlying airfields. Through December 1942 until mid-May 1943, elements of the 1st Armoured Division drove east through Algeria and fought battles with Italian and German forces in Tunisia, who had retreated there from El Alamein. On several occasions, however, the 1st Armoured were forced to withdraw with heavy losses of tanks and equipment, and as the spring of 1943 progressed and advances in Tunisia remained slow, strategic Allied plans were well underway for the next stage of the Mediterranean campaign. The plans assumed that, following the successful conclusion of operations in Tunisia, an invasion of Sicily was required, and this would have to be spearheaded by the first Allied airborne assault of World War II. The operation was codenamed Husky. For this task, on May 10th, the United States. On several occasions, however, the 1st Armoured were forced to withdraw with heavy losses of tanks and equipment, and as the spring of 1943 progressed and advances in Tunisia remained slow, strategic Allied plans were well underway for the next stage of the Mediterranean campaign. The plans assumed that, following the successful conclusion of operations in Tunisia, an invasion of Sicily was required, and this would have to be spearheaded by the first Allied airborne assault of World War II. The operation was codenamed Husky. For this task, on May the 10th, the United States 82nd Airborne Division arrived at Casablanca, North Africa, for transport into Tunisia to await their first operational jump of the war. In Tunisia, as the end of April 1943 approached and the 1st Armoured Division were struggling to make any significant advances, the 34th Infantry Division was tasked with taking and holding the strategic Hill 609 and the surrounding area that separated the American forces from the German Afrika Korps. As it turned out, the battle proved to be the first clear-cut victory of American forces in the Tunisian campaign and was dubbed the American Army's coming of age. By mid-May 1943, the German and Italian forces in Tunisia had surrendered, and the badly mauled and depleted 1st Armoured Division was moved to French Morocco to be reorganised into a more offensive unit. Allied strategy dictated that any future planned invasion of the Italian mainland would require the removal of Axis forces from the island of Sicily, thus opening the Mediterranean sea lanes for the unhindered movement of Allied merchant shipping. Therefore, on the 9th of July 1943, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division parachuted onto high ground in southwest Sicily and took the airfield northwest of Gila. From there, they blocked all Axis counter-offensive routes to the bridgehead established by the US 1st Infantry Division earlier that day. By the end of the month, the 82nd Airborne Division had pushed along the western highway of Sicily, seizing the northwestern coastal area of the island. From there, they waited for their second combat jump of the war, Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of mainland Italy. On September the 9th, 1943, Operation Avalanche began with successful landings and the establishment of a beachhead by the US 5th Army at Salerno. However, over the next couple of days, sustained German counterattacks threatened to throw the Americans back into the sea. To alleviate this potential disaster, parachute and glider infantry troopers of the 82nd Airborne Division were taken out of reserve in Sicily and dropped at threatened hotspots to provide reinforcement. Soon after the drop, the beachhead was secured, allowing the division to advance southwest towards Naples, which it reached in early October 1943. For almost 6 months after the end of hostilities in Tunisia, the 34th Infantry Division had trained intensively for Operation Avalanche, and in late September 1943 it landed at Salerno. During the autumn of 1943, the division drove relentlessly north through Italy, engaging the enemy on many occasions to help clear the Allied path to the heavily fortified series of German and Italian prepared defensive lines called the Winter Line. At the end of October 1943, the 1st Armoured Division had moved to newly liberated Naples to assist them, and in November it participated in the attacks on the Winter Line fortifications. This series of 3 lines focused around the town of Monte Cassino. They were designed to defend the western section of Italy, which led directly and uninterrupted to Rome. The Gustav line was the primary line, and 2 subsidiary ones merged into it, the Bernhardt and the Hitler lines. As all this was taking place in Italy, the 82nd Airborne Division, minus the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, was shipped out of Naples and arrived in Northern Ireland on December the 9th, 1943. Within a month, they were joined there directly from the United States by the 507th and 508th Parachute Infantry Regiments. The 507th were assigned to the 82nd to replace the 504th, who were still at Anzio. Back in Italy, on January the 22nd, 1944, the 1st Armoured Division took part in Operation Shingle, the amphibious landings at Anzio. The resort town of Anzio was on Italy's western coast, approximately 80 miles behind the Gustav line and 35 miles from Rome. These landings, coupled with any breakthrough at the Gustav line, would clear the Allied path to Italy's capital and outflank the Axis armies. A little side note here, on January the 22nd and 23rd, 1944, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which had been detached from the 82nd Airborne Division to assist in Operation Shingle, landed on the beach at Anzio to defend the beachhead. It remained there for 8 weeks and therefore never came to Northern Ireland as part of the 82nd. Their fierce fighting during the engagement earned them the nickname Devils in Baggy Pants, a reference taken from an entry made in a German officer's diary. Returning to the 1st Armoured Division, during and after the breakout from the Anzio beachhead, up until July 1944, the division lost over 100 tanks as it pursued the retreating Axis armies towards Rome. As Operation Shingle progressed for the 1st Armoured Division, on the 24th of January 1944, the 34th Infantry Division took part in the First Battle of Monte Cassino, when it attacked Monastery Hill from the high mountains to the rear. After 3 days, however, their attacks on the monastery and town had failed. However, the performance of the 34th Infantry Division in the mountains has been called one of the finest feats carried out by any soldiers during the war. The infantry regiments of the division sustained about 80% losses in the battle. And it would eventually take the combined force of 5 Allied infantry divisions to finish what the 34th nearly accomplished on its own. At the end of March 1944, after rest and recuperation, the 34th Infantry Division landed at the Anzio beachhead and maintained defensive positions there until at the end of May, joining the offensive and breaking out to race towards the Italian capital Rome. On June the 4th, 1944, men of the 135th Regiment, 34th Infantry Division were amongst the first to enter the city. Soon thereafter, 1st Armoured Division tanks were moving through the city on their relentless push towards Milan, which they entered in April 1945. After Rome, the 34th Infantry Division continued its drive up the boot of Italy through heavily entrenched German positions. In the end, the removal of Axis forces had come at a heavy cost. The battles and assaults on the winter lines and Monte Cassino and the breakout at Anzio resulted in over 98,000 Allied casualties. As the African campaign was coming to an end, however, on a different front, England was already heaving with US troops awaiting their introduction into the European theatre of operations. D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, was rapidly approaching and 15 Corps were about to enter the fray. GINI Combat Chronicles, 1942 to 1945. Part 2, 15 Corps at War in the European Theatre of Operations. 15 Corps contained approximately 60,000 troops who came to Northern Ireland between October and July 1943 to 1944. They were the second phase of US troops to come to Northern Ireland and consisted of the 2nd, 5th and 8th Infantry Divisions and the 82nd Airborne Division. 15 Corps were assigned to Northern Ireland for advanced training and preparations for the D-Day landings and the Allied invasion of Europe. Through February and March of 1944, the 82nd Airborne Division had left Northern Ireland for England, where intensive training and preparations for D-Day were undertaken. In the early morning of D-Day, their mission, codenamed Operation Boston, was to parachute behind enemy lines onto the flooded Normandy countryside and capture and hold crucial bridges and junctions, thus preventing German troops and armoured movements towards Utah Beach, which would soon be stormed by the United States 4th Infantry Division. As it unfolded, the dropping of 6,500 paratroopers carried by over 300 C-47 transport planes was badly scattered. On this map, the solid circles represent 82nd Airborne Division landing zones. The dashed ones are 101st Airborne Division drop zones. The little dots are where the actual landings took place. Only one unit, the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, previously billeted in and around Cookstown, was dropped accurately, allowing them to achieve their objective by capturing the strategically important town of St. Mary-Glees, the first to be liberated in occupied Europe. The troopers of the other two parachute regiments, the 507th and 508th, billeted in Portrush and Port Stewart respectively when they were in Ireland, were dropped that far away from their drop zones that they suffered so many casualties from drowning and enemy fire to make it impossible for them to organise fully and achieve their D-Day objectives. The following day, the 82nd Paratroopers were reinforced by the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment. Also on that day, after training in Northern Ireland, From late October 1943 to mid-April 1944, the United States 2nd Infantry Division crossed the Channel to land on Omaha Beach. 2 days later, on June the 9th, a combination of 82nd Airborne and glider-borne troops combined in combat to secure another D-Day objective, the bridge at Lafayette. It was during this action that Private First Class Charles de Glopper, previously billeted in Portlawn Forest Park, single-handedly defended his platoon's position and was subsequently awarded the Medal of Honour for his heroism. On the 10th June, an initial assault by the 2nd Infantry Division on Hill 192, a key enemy strongpoint on the road to Saint-Lô, failed. For 3 weeks, the division's position was fortified, and on the 11th of July, using a rolling barrage and the support of 25,000 rounds fired by 8 artillery battalions, the hill was taken. Through the middle of June, the 82nd Airborne attacked down the west coast of the Cotonou Peninsula, capturing strategic towns and hills along the way before being pulled back to England in mid-July. After 33 days of bloody combat, casualties were 457 killed, 1,440 wounded, and 2,583 missing in action. The 82nd Airborne Division's post-battle report read, 33 days of action without relief, without replacements. Every mission accomplished, no ground gained was ever relinquished. After training in Northern Ireland, the 8th Infantry Division landed on Utah Beach on the 4th of July 1944, almost a month after D-Day. 3 days later, the division entered combat, fighting through the Normandy hedgerows before being pushed to Rennes towards the city of Brest. General Donald Syou was given the command of the division at this time. He led them into Brittany and helped capture the coastal heavily defended stronghold, which was a major port for German U-boats. The Battle of Brest. General Donald Syou was given command of the division at this time and led them into Brittany to help capture this coastal heavily defended stronghold, which was a major port for German U-boats. The Battle of Brest would be the first major engagement for the 8th Infantry Division. There they would fight alongside the 2nd Infantry Division. The city's fortifications proved to be very difficult to overcome, and even after heavy Allied artillery barrages, fighting from house to house was intense until eventually the old city was razed to the ground and the port taken. While attacking the city, General Syou's son, Harry, a P-47 pilot, was killed when his plane was shot down in support of the 8th Division. General Syou had ordered the airstrike and watched as the P-47 crashed, but didn't know at the time it was his son on board. Needless to say, this affected the general so deeply that he resigned his post. Less than a week after the 8th Infantry Division landed at Utah Beach, the 5th Infantry Division were shipped there from Northern Ireland to relieve the 1st Infantry Division, also known as the Big Red One, which had assaulted Omaha Beach in the first wave on D-Day. Almost immediately, the division took up defensive positions before beginning offensive actions southeast towards Saint-Lô as part of Lieutenant General George Patton Jr.'s 3rd Army. As the Battle of Brest raged on for the 2nd and 8th Infantry Divisions, Throughout August 1944, the 5th Infantry Division attacked and captured several towns. Along the way, it crossed the Seine, the Marne rivers before seizing Rheims and positions east of Paris and Verdun late August 1944. These movements, when completed, enabled the Third Army to outflank Paris and split northern and southern France in two. In 27 days, the 5th Infantry Division had covered over 700 miles and was preparing to enter Germany by assaulting the city of Metz on the 7th of September 1944. To do this, it had to secure the Moselle River. This it managed after 5 days battling the worst the fanatical enemy could throw at it. Casualties were exceptionally high. 1,400 Red Devils were killed or wounded in the operation. The 5th Infantry Division was now south of Metz, preparing to capture a city fortified by 22 forts. As the 8th Infantry Division, following its actions at Brest in mid-September, the division turned eastwards, driving across France into Luxembourg, where it got some well-earned rest and recuperation in preparation for whatever operations lay ahead. Elsewhere that month, the Allies were ready to attempt to enter Germany by crossing the Rhine. Codenamed Operation Market Garden, it began on September the 17th with an Allied airborne assault intended to capture and secure 9 bridges on the Dutch-German border. This would allow a rapid armoured advance by ground forces, thus creating a bulge into the industrial region of the German Ruhr. It was the 82nd Airborne Division's role to take the bridges at Grave and Nijmegen. For this operation, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who had remained at Anzio when the rest of the division came to Ireland, rejoined the 82nd. The 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, once stationed in Portrush, was attached to the 17th Airborne Division. There they were held in reserve, not to participate in Operation Market Garden. Market Garden was the 82nd Airborne Division's 4th combat jump in World War II. Fighting off ferocious German counterattacks, the division captured and held the 2 bridges at Grave and Human, but failed to take the more strategic Val Bridge at Nijmegen. As it turned out, however, because of the defeat of the British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem, the gateway to Germany was not opened and the 82nd Airborne Division was ordered back to France. In France, the Battle of Brest had raged for 39 days before the city was surrendered to the commander of the 8th Infantry Division on the 19th of September 1944. Following the surrender, the division turned eastward towards the German border, which they reached in early October. Their compatriots in the battle, the 2nd Infantry Division, took a brief rest before moving to defensive positions on the Belgian border in late September. Back in Metz, throughout November, the 5th Infantry Division fought against a determined enemy to take the city. Some of the 22 forts were surrendered and others bypassed as the division closed. Some of the 22 forts were surrendered and others were bypassed as the division closed in on the city, forcing it to surrender on November the 21st, 1944. Following the actions at Brest, the 8th Infantry Division turned eastwards into Luxembourg. Here the division recovered before moving to the Hurtgen Forest on the Belgian-German border, where it took part in what became the longest single battle for the US Army on German soil during World War II, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. As it turned out, the Germans successfully defended the area, holding their home ground until, on December the 16th, 1944, they launched their surprise winter offensive through the Ardennes forest, catching the Allies completely by surprise and beginning what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Excluding the 8th Infantry Division, all the other divisions who left Northern Ireland to fight in the European theatre of operations were involved in this battle. The 82nd Airborne Division were moved into action on December the 16th, and despite poor equipment, winter snow and insufficient reinforcements, managed to blunt General von Rundstedt's northern penetration in the American lines until forced to withdraw on Christmas Day 1944. The 5th Infantry Division was thrown in against the southern flank of the Bulge near Luxembourg City, helping to reduce it by the end of January 1945. The 2nd Infantry Division took up and held defensive positions at Elsenborn Ridge, the westernmost high ground of the Ardennes. 1945 began with the 82nd Airborne Division suffering heavy casualties and launching renewed attacks on the German lines in the Ardennes. Eventually forced to withdraw, the division was placed in reserve and replaced by elements of the 2nd Infantry Division, which in February counterattacked the German lines to recapture lost ground. At the same time, the 82nd Airborne Division had come out of reserve to cross the Ruhr River into Germany. The Ardennes offensive inflicted heavy losses on Allied forces and set back the invasion of Germany by several weeks. However, it exhausted the German army's resources on the Western Front, causing the Bulge to collapse and open the way for the Allies to advance towards the Siegfried Line. Join me in Part 3 as the Allies enter Germany. The war comes to its conclusion with VE Day and VJ Day, and the troops finally go home. GINI Combat Chronicles 1945 to 1946, Part 3, Into Germany, to War's End, and Home. The Siegfried Line was a series of fortifications on the western border of Germany. Stretching more than 390 miles from the Dutch to the Swiss borders, it's probably best known for the reinforced concrete dragon's teeth that impeded the movement of tanks and mechanised infantry. In February 1945, the 5th Infantry Division smashed through it before crossing the Rhine in late March. The 2nd Infantry Division had reached the Rhine in early March and was tasked with guarding the Ludendorff Bridge, better known as the Bridge at Remagen. This it did for 10 days, allowing 6 Allied divisions of over 25,000 men to cross it before it collapsed. The division then crossed the Rhine on the 21st of March and advanced into northwestern Germany, capturing the city of Leipzig in April. Returning to the Mediterranean theatre for a moment. After the liberation of Rome, the 34th Infantry and 1st Armoured Divisions continued their drive up the boot of Italy through heavily entrenched German positions until, in April 1945, the German retreat became a rout. On May the 2nd, the remnants of an entire German corps, totalling over 40,000 men belonging to Army Group C, surrendered to the 34th Infantry Division near Milan. The Italian campaign was over, and hostilities in the Mediterranean theatre had come to an end. As for the 34th Infantry Division, it moved to the borders of France and Switzerland. The 1st Armoured pushed north into Germany to perform occupation duties. In the west, heavy fighting continued as the Allies pushed deeper into Germany towards its capital, Berlin. By April 1945, the 8th Infantry Division had advanced into the Rhineland. Fighting its way to the rear, it aided in the destruction and capture of enemy forces in the German industrial heartland. Having itself crossed the Rhine on the night of the 22nd of March 1945, the 5th Infantry Division advanced to the city of Frankfurt. Here it conducted the main attack in a 4-day battle for control of the city, which ended on the 29th of March. In early April, after capturing 19,000 German soldiers, the division joined up with the 8th Infantry to help clear the remaining German forces trapped in the Ruhr pocket. Also in April, the 82nd Airborne Division arrived in Cologne to perform security duties. Shortly thereafter, it crossed the Elbe River at Ludwigslust and accepted the surrender of over 150,000 soldiers of the German 21st Army. Following their security duty in the Ruhr area, the 8th Infantry Division crossed the Elbe also. A few days earlier, Soviet troops advancing from the east and American troops advancing from the west met at the Elbe, effectively cutting Germany in two and contributing enormously to ending the war. At the beginning of May 1945, as the 2nd and 5th Infantry Divisions moved to positions along the German-Czech border, the 8th Infantry Division had advanced further into northern Germany to the city of Ludwigslust. Here, along with the 82nd Airborne Division, they came upon the Wobblin concentration camp. Held there were some 5,000 inmates, many of whom were suffering from starvation and disease. The sanitary conditions at the camp were deplorable. There was little food or water, and some prisoners had resorted to cannibalism. In the first week after liberation, more than 200 inmates died. In the aftermath, the United States Army ordered the townspeople of Ludwigslust to visit the camp and bury its dead. On May the 7th, 1945, the 82nd Airborne Division conducted funeral services for 200 inmates. Attending the ceremony were town citizens, captured German officers, and several hundred members of the Airborne. Berlin was taken by Russian forces on the 2nd of May 1945. Hitler had committed suicide 3 days earlier, and Nazi Germany had lost the war. The Allies formally accepted the unconditional surrender of the German armed forces on the 8th of May 1945. Berlin was taken by Russian forces on the 2nd of May 1945. Hitler had committed suicide 3 days earlier, and Nazi Germany had lost the war. The Allies formally accepted the unconditional surrender of the German armed forces on the 8th of May 1945. World War II in Europe had ended, and Victory in Europe Day was celebrated throughout the Western world. It had been 3 years and 4 months since the first phase of American troops arrived in Northern Ireland as part of Operation Magnet, and 10 months since the troops from the second phase departed. Those that had survived the conflict looked forward to going home, but it did not come straight away. On VE Day, the 5th Infantry Division occupied positions in Bavaria. From there, it prepared to return to the United States to refit for further service in the Pacific Theatre. General George Patton, commander of the 3rd Army, of which the 5th Infantry Division played a major role, had this to say in a later letter: "Nothing I can say can add to the glory which you have achieved. Throughout the whole advance across France you spearheaded the attack, and I know that all of you have dauntless spirit." The division returned to the US from Le Havre, France in mid-July 1945, arriving there later that month. On VE Day, the 2nd Infantry Division was in Czechoslovakia attacking the city of Pilsen in the Sudetenland when it heard word of Germany's unconditional surrender. The division returned to the United States via the New York port of embarkation on the 20th of July 1945. Once there, it began training in Texas to prepare for participation in the scheduled invasion of Japan. But VJ Day came on August the 15th, bringing the Second World War to a close before they could be shipped out. Earlier that month, the 8th Infantry Division had departed France and arrived in New York on the 14th of August 1945. Soon thereafter, its men were discharged and the division inactivated. VJ Day also put an end to plans to deploy the 5th Infantry Division in Japan. On September the 20th, 1946, the division was deactivated at Camp Campbell, Kentucky. In October 1945, after rest, sightseeing and occupation duties, the 34th Infantry Division sailed from Naples to the USA. Its men were mustered out and the division deactivated on November the 3rd at Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia. Of the several thousand 34th Infantry Division GIs who had been amongst the first American troops to land in Belfast, only a handful remained with the division at the end. The price of their victory was high, and it was unfortunate that once the Allies hit the beaches at Normandy on D-Day, it became a forgotten front. Even when the division returned to the US, it was inactivated in obscurity and its men dismissed without fanfare or so much as a final parade. In a similar vein, the troops of the 1st Armoured Division returned to New York Port on the 24th of April 1946 and were inactivated the following day at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. Following the surrender of Germany, the 82nd Airborne Division was ordered to Berlin for occupation duty, and there, on the 7th of September 1945, it took part in the Allied Victory Parade. Again, General George Patton was so impressed with the 82nd's Honour Guard that day, he said, "In all my years in the Army and all the Honour Guards I have ever seen, the 82nd's is undoubtedly the best. Hence the All-Americans became known as America's Guard of Honour." The 82nd returned to the United States on January the 3rd, 1946. A few days later, it was chosen to represent the US Army and lead the New York City Victory Parade to celebrate the conclusion of World War II. Instead of being demobilised, the division made its permanent home at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where it resides to this day. To conclude this presentation, this table shows casualties inflicted on each division during the conflict. It's a sobering thought that approximately 70% of the GIs listed here were billeted in Northern Ireland, and that so many never made it home. Thank you for watching my presentation. It was a pleasure to present it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you also to Cookstown Council for asking me to celebrate VE Day in this way, and best wishes to everyone. Stay safe Stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives.